On June 9, 2020, investigators in Salem, Idaho, walked onto a rural property and began to dig. They had a search warrant, they had a theory, and somewhere in the back of their minds, after 9 months of chasing a woman who had fled across state lines, married a man whose wife had just died, and told anyone who asked that her children were fine, somewhere in the back of their minds, they already knew what they were going to find. They were right. Buried on the property belonging to Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow's new husband, investigators found the remains of 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. J.J. had been wrapped in plastic and placed in a bag. Tylee's remains had been burned. Both children had been there for months. Lori Vallow was arrested the same day, not in Idaho, not in Arizona where she had lived, but in Hawaii, where she and Chad had been honeymooning. She was sitting at a resort. She had told police in December that J.J. and Tylee were safe and with family. She had said it calmly and directly, and then refused to say anything more. By the time investigators found her children in the ground, Lori Vallow had not seen them in 9 months. To understand how a mother reaches that point, to understand how any of what followed was possible, you have to understand who Lori Vallow was and who she was becoming long before the world ever heard her name. Lori Cox was born in 1973 and grew up in a religious household in Arizona. People who knew her as a young woman described her as bright, outgoing, confident. She was charismatic in a way that made people want to be near her. She was the kind of person who commanded a room, who could make you feel very quickly like the most important person she had spoken to that day. She married several times. She had children. By the time she reached her mid-40s, she was living in Chandler, Arizona, with her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, and their young adopted son, J.J., a 7-year-old boy who was autistic and non-verbal, and who, by all accounts from family and friends, was deeply loved and deeply loving in return. Her daughter, Tylee, was from an earlier relationship. Tylee was 16 in 2019, a teenager who liked photography and animals, and who had recently been to Yellowstone National Park with her family in September of that year. There are photographs from that trip. Tylee is smiling. Her uncle Alex Cox is there too. It was a normal trip. Within 3 weeks of those photographs being taken, Tylee Ryan was dead. But to get there, you need to understand what had been building inside Lori Vallow's belief system for years before that September afternoon at Yellowstone. Sometime around 2017 or 2018, Lori became deeply involved in a fringe religious movement built around the ideas of a man named Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell was an author. He wrote fictional novels about the end times, about angels and demons, about people whose souls could be taken over by dark spirits. He was also a self-proclaimed prophet within a loose community of followers who believed he had the ability to assign spiritual identities to individuals, to declare whether a person carried light or darkness inside them. For many people who encountered Chad's teachings, it was an unusual but apparently harmless belief system. For Lori Vallow, it became something else entirely. By 2019, the year everything collapsed, Chad had told Lori that several people in her life had been spiritually compromised. The word the community used was zombified, a person whose original soul had been replaced by a dark entity, a person who was, in their belief system, no longer truly human, a person who could be removed from the earth without moral consequence. Investigators would later establish that Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell had assigned spiritual dark ratings to multiple people in their lives, and the people on that list had a disturbing tendency to die. In July 2019, Lori's estranged husband, Charles Vallow, was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Alex claimed self-defense. He said Charles had come at him with a bat. The investigation was inconclusive. Alex was not charged. 5 months later, Alex Cox himself was dead. A blood clot, authorities said. He was found in his apartment in December of the same year. In October 2019, Chad Daybell's wife of 26 years, Tammy Daybell, died suddenly at their home in Salem, Idaho. She was 49 years old and appeared to be in good health. The medical examiner initially listed her cause of death as natural causes, and she was buried. 2 weeks after Tammy's funeral, Chad and Lori were married in Hawaii. Those deaths, Charles, Tammy, Alex, created a legal and investigative crisis that would eventually unravel everything. But at the center of it from the beginning were the children. JJ and Tylee were last seen alive in September 2019. When investigators began trying to account for their whereabouts in November of that year, after Charles Vallow's family raised the alarm, Lori told police the children were with family. They were safe. She was vague about specifics. Police in Rexburg, Idaho, where Lori and Chad were living, conducted a welfare check. Lori answered the door. She said JJ was with a friend in Arizona. She said Tylee was in Arizona too. She gave no contact information. She closed the door. Investigators knew within days that both of those statements were false. JJ was not in Arizona. Tylee was not in Arizona. Neither child had been seen, enrolled in school, or contacted by any family member for weeks. Police issued a missing persons report for both children in November 2019. By December, Lori and Chad had left Idaho. They resurfaced in Hawaii. The question that drove investigators across 2 states and through months of dead ends was the same question that the rest of the country would eventually be asking. Where were the children, and what had their mother told herself to justify their absence? The answer, when it came, was delivered partly through text messages and emails recovered by investigators, partly through testimony from people inside the belief community surrounding Chad Daybell, and partly through the statements of Lori's own sister-in-law, Zulema Pastenis, who had been present for several conversations and who would eventually cooperate with prosecutors. What emerged was a picture of a belief system that had curdled into something that functioned like a justification for violence. Chad had assigned dark spiritual ratings to both JJ and Tylee. JJ, Lori believed, was no longer JJ, the child she had raised, the boy who did not speak but who loved his family with the specific tenderness of a child who shows love in action rather than words. In the framework she had built around Chad's teachings, JJ had become a vessel for something dark. The same was true for Tylee. And in that framework, removing them from the earth was not a crime, it was a spiritual necessity. Investigators were unable to determine an exact cause of death for either child. JJ's remains were more preserved. The manner of death could not be established with certainty from what was recovered. Tylee's remains had been dismembered and burned. A destruction of evidence so deliberate and so thorough that forensic investigators spent months working with what they had. What prosecutors had, ultimately, was the location, the timing, The text messages, the phone data, the trail of lies Lori had told everyone, from police to family members, for the 9 months between her children's disappearance and the day investigators put shovels into the ground in Chad Daybell's backyard. Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed in December 2019. A revised autopsy found that she had been asphyxiated. She had been killed and then buried while Lori and Chad began planning their future. The trials came slowly. The case moved through court across several years. In May 2023, Lori Vallow Daybell was convicted on all counts. 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of JJ and Tylee, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Charles Vallow as a co-conspirator. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chad Daybell was tried separately. His trial concluded in May 2024. He was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder, JJ, Tylee, and Tammy, along with multiple additional charges. He was sentenced to death. At her sentencing, Lori Vallow Daybell said almost nothing. She read a brief statement in which she declared herself an innocent woman and a loving mother. The family members of JJ and Tylee who were present in the courtroom listened to her speak. Some of them cried, some did not. JJ Vallow was 7 years old. He had spent his short life learning to communicate in a world that did not always make room for him. He was adopted by Lori because she wanted him. He trusted her the way children trust the people who raise them, completely, without reservation, without the knowledge that trust can be weaponized. Tylee Ryan was 16. She had her whole life ahead of her. There are photographs of her at Yellowstone, taken 3 weeks before she died, looking at the world with the particular openness of a teenager who does not yet know what the world is capable of. What makes the Lori Vallow case so difficult to sit with, beyond the deaths themselves, beyond the legal findings, beyond the sentences, is the specific mechanism at its center. The belief system was not a spontaneous delusion, it was constructed. It was constructed from books and sermons and private conversations and gradually escalating claims about who was spiritually compromised and what that meant for the people around them. It was built slowly enough that the people inside it could not see how far they had traveled from any recognizable version of reality. And at the end of that road, in a backyard in Salem, Idaho, were 2 children who had been placed there by the people who should have protected them more than anyone else in the world. JJ and Tylee are buried now. Their names are on their headstones. Their family knows where they are. That is more than they knew for 9 months in 1919 and 2020, when the answer to every question about those 2 children was a closed door and a calm voice saying everything was fine. Everything was not fine.